I love stories. People have told stories and listened to stories since the dawn of time. I think nearly everything, and certainly everyone, has a story to tell, even vintage clothing. So I thought I'd start by telling you mine. When I was little, my grandparents lived with us. This is me, the bald one, more of that later, with my grandfather, my sister, and my mum. This is in the garden of our family home. It was a really enriching and wonderful part of my childhood to have them living with us. I would sneak home via my granny's kitchen and get a spoonful of sugar on my way home from school so that my parents didn't catch me beforehand. Or I would sit with my granny as she knitted vests and pants to be sent to Ethiopia for the famine. I never did work out how grateful they were for knitted underwear in Ethiopia, but there you go. My grandfather was invariably to be found in the garden, either tending to his vegetable patch, or digging the beds, or just sitting reading behind a windbreaker in a deck chair. I would spend many hours in his company behind that windbreaker. It was so special to me to be in his glow, basking in his glow. When I was about 7, I read the BFG, and I was sure as anything that this gentle, avuncular character was almost certainly based on my gentle giant of a grandfather who stood at 6'6" tall. I would bring my grandpa my Barbie and Cindy dolls to repair, no doubt the limbs ripped off by my brother, and I would sit and listen to him and talk to him as he mended my dolls for me. And I always had a lovely feeling in my tummy, butterflies in my tummy if you like, not like the butterflies I feel today, which are pure nerves, but a happy, lovely feeling of contentment. It was warmth and pure contentment. And years later, I described this feeling to my husband, and he said, "Oh yes, I feel that too sometimes." And we now collectively recall it as Grandpa fixing Barbie. I recently attended Fern Cotton's Happy Place Festival in London, and I had this feeling throughout the day almost. And I realized that day that it's an energy, it's a happy place, it's contentment, and it's connection with others. When I was 11, Grandpa died. Now, he was 92 and had had a good life. I was incredibly sad, but it was also a very busy time of my life. I was taking my 11 plus and moving up to big school. And it turned out I found my own way of coping with it. I developed my own coping mechanism. I went into my sister's bedroom one night and I told her that I was losing my hair. She was shocked and couldn't believe it, but I parted sections of my hair and I showed her what was happening. And I was confused and I said, "I don't know why this is happening," but I did know why this was happening. She took me downstairs to speak to my mum and dad and tell them what was happening. And they were also confused. And so began many visits to dermatologists, having biopsies of my scalp taken, and observation from my parents to find out what was going on. I knew what was going on, as I say. I took to wearing bandanas at this time because my hairline, as you can see from the slide, looked a little like this. But behind that hairline, my hair looked like this. And for those of you who can't read that side, it says trichotillomania, a compulsive desire to pull out one's hair. And that's exactly what I had been doing. I hasten to add that I've only really been able to admit that that's what it is in maybe the last 15 years of my life, and that was 30 years ago. We told people that it was alopecia. I was too embarrassed at the time. But what strikes me that it was just such a fascinating reaction to the grief of losing my grandfather, that I would go so far as to tear out my own hair. We've often heard about the Kubler-Ross grief cycle, the 5 stages of grief, and I think there are certainly 5 stages, but I think there could also be 5,000 stages if that was your case. You might also get stopped on stage number 2 or stage number 4 and find those insurmountable, so I think that's slightly misleading. And also, stages feels like there's a finish line, and I know that there's no finish line. In fact, I think that grief is full of restarts and diversions and alternative routes, which I would find out later. But I became a normal preteen and teenager. I learned to play the drums, not very well, don't play anymore. I did a lot of sports, I was very active. I had made and cemented and cherished many friendships that stand with me to this day. And I hung out with my family. Here's me and my mum, bandana on, you can't really see it there. I definitely was taught a carpe diem, seize the day attitude to life, and that was instilled in me by my parents. They knew what life was all about, that it was there for the living. Here I am, I think you'll agree, sporting a few too many bandanas. I can count 3 in this. At one point when I was 11 or 12, I wondered, did I start the global craze for bandanas from my super comfortable middle-class existence in Hollywood, Northern Ireland? But I think it was probably Tupac, but I did wonder for a while. This photo is taken around the time that my mum met her biological mother. Mum had been adopted in 1948, which you will know was not an uncommon story on this island of Ireland. She was lucky. She had wonderful parents, a brilliant upbringing, and went on to become a nurse. She had wanted to go to art college, but that was deemed inappropriate for a young lady in those days. It was through nursing that she met my father, who was a doctor, and she went on to have 3 pretty amazing, if I do say so myself, children, some of whom have gone on to do all right in this world. Life was great. The wind was fully in our sails. But in March 1997, the wind dropped away. Mum had a terrible diagnosis. She was given a diagnosis of pancreatic cancer with 3 months to live. She did manage to live 15, but throughout that time, we knew that it was terminal. We knew she was going to die, but we also had to continue as a normal family. We went on holidays. I took my A-levels a few months later. My sister went to university in Glasgow. My brother studied for his GCSEs, not very well, not much, studied for his GCSEs the following year. But life went on. This is my sister and my mum and I on a girls' trip to New York City. This is us in Central Park, about 6 months after her diagnosis. Please ignore my hair. I did say it was a complex relationship. Mum fought so bravely for 15 months and was an example to us all. Here she is, she'd just turned 50. She'd noticeably lost weight, she'd just completed her radio and chemotherapy, but was still looking beautiful on her way out to a friend's daughter's wedding. 1 month later, she died. As I held her hand in the Northern Ireland hospice on a Sunday afternoon in July 1998, she died. I think you can tell, we were shattered, all of us. But I'm not here to talk about her death. I want to talk about her life. I want to talk about the impact it made on me and how it really reinforced in me that attitude of carpe diem. So I committed fully to that attitude. I wanted to live a life of adventure and taking chances. I wanted to do things that she never got to do. For me, it's all about living a meaningful life, full of meaningful content. And through that, I hope to find contentment. I went to art college. I went on to study a degree in fashion, and I worked in the fashion industry for a few years. Really enjoyed it. But after a time, I needed a complete change. Now, what's a complete change to working in the fashion industry and traveling the world? Well, it's moving to Africa, training to be a field guide, living in a caravan with no electricity, and rehabilitating lions. After a year in Africa, my father was diagnosed with leukemia, so I had to come home. Now, I want to say, don't worry, it's not a total death fest. He recovered, kicks its ass. That was 14 years ago, and he's alive and very well to tell the tale today. I fell in love at first sight with my husband, who I saw across the room one day. And 3 years later, my father was scanning his sister. Don't worry, he is an obstetrician. She was pregnant, and he said, "My daughter always fancied your brother, do you think, And she said, "Oh yes, that'd be great." And 2 years later, we were married. It's a very typical Northern Irish relationship, even though he was born and bred in Southern California. In fact, this is a photograph of my mother and my now father-in-law in 1988, when I would have been 9 and my husband would have been 16. And that's about as Northern Irish as it gets. I think it was all very Bridget Jones. I went on to have 2 amazing children who are the lights of my life. But it was having these children that really reinforced another wave of grief in me. I want my children to know more about their Nana Lorna. I know that my grandpa and my mum can still be part of my life and of my children's lives. I strive to remember them well. It's my tribute to them. The novelist and mental health activist Matt Haig says in his book, How to Stop Time, "People you love never die, not completely. They live in your mind the way they always lived inside you. You keep their light alive. If you remember them well enough, they can still guide you. Like the shine of long extinguished stars could guide ships in unfamiliar waters. If you stop mourning them and start listening to them, they still have the power to change your life, They can, in short, be salvation. It's the ethos that inspired me to found Afterbook. It inspires me to keep telling my mum's stories and to keep being guided by her, to keep her memory alive and to keep seeking grandpa-fixing Barbie. A show of hands again. How many people in this room have lost someone they love? That's what I thought. It sucks, and as another TED Talk speaker that I'm familiar with, Nora, said, I've done the maths and I've run the figures, and it turns out that no one's getting out of here alive. But I suspect and hope that with that loss, it made you consider what it's all about. We're all here in this beautiful, achingly, frustratingly beautiful building, unused building, to imagine what life is all about, to imagine a better future, to honour the brilliant light, vision and life that is Lyra McKee. It seems to me that few lived a more meaningful life than Lyra. She understood that it was the connections we'd make with others and the contentment she sought, fought for, and promoted that is what it's all about. Imagine a world where we could all have that understanding without having to experience a loss, without having to have a life-changing event or the murder of an amazing, innocent woman to really make us understand. Happiness, contentment for all, equality, acceptance, they come sometimes hard-won from living a life of meaning and with making connections. This is a young man named Chris McCandless who went into the wild in 1992. You might have read the book or seen the film. Ultimately, he died in his solitary pursuit of adventure and happiness. That happiness needs to go hand in hand with connection to others, and he realized it a little too late. It is a gift that we must strive to both give and receive. Give grandpa-fixing Barbie and receive grandpa-fixing Barbie. I love this quote from Confucius. I realized that we only had one life to live through the catalyst of grief. Imagine having that realization built in. Imagine if content wasn't just what we post on our social media. Imagine if it was the stories and the narrative that make up our lives. How we touch people, how we connect, what we do and achieve, what we give. I would like to dedicate this talk today, obviously, to my grandfather, to my mum, to Lyra McKee, but also to Nora Quarren, whose aunt I have known for many, many years. Keep telling her stories, keep her memory alive, and remember her well. Thank you.